Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training's podcast series entitled Lived Experiences with Traumatic Brain Injury. I'm your host, Melaney Grenz, and my amazing guest today is Dr. Kay Reyna. Dr. Reyna is my very good friend and colleague here at the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training. Dr. Kay Reyna wears many hats. She's a wife, a mother to 3 children, and a proud grandmother. Beyond her roles in her personal life, Kay is a distinguished researcher and a staunch advocate for individuals affected by brain injury, particularly those within law enforcement, first responders, and veterans community. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kay.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Glad you're here. Well, friend, in 2009, your journey into the field of traumatic brain injury began with a pivotal moment just days before Thanksgiving. You received a phone call that changed everything, leading you down a path of discovery and advocacy. Kay, please take us on this journey with you today.
Okay, sure. So, yes, it was out of the blue. This was not on my trajectory for my life. I was actually I was in finance at the time, working at a middle school, and I had done a lot of accounting. I had worked 20 years in accounting. And so my husband was injured in the line of duty as a North Carolina State Highway Patrol Master Trooper on November 23rd, 2009. Now, that weekend, just prior to, I had been on a field trip with the kids, and we had gone to this hotel for this conference with the middle school. I drove the bus, and because it was so much cheaper for this middle school to have their finance secretary, drive the bus on this trip. So anyway, I had been on the trip with the kids, and when we walked into the hotel, and this was so interesting, and now I wish I'd taken a picture, but as I walked in with the kids to the hotel, and our kids happened to be on the trip. When I say our kids, it was kids from the middle school, and then our kids were actually on the trip, 2 of our girls. And there was a big poster there from the North Carolina State Highway Patrol, and there was Umberto right there on the poster. They used him a lot. They sent him out in the community. He is Hispanic, and they send him to the Hispanic festivals. They send him out in the community and all these things for their Hispanic state trooper, kind of to represent them for the state of North Carolina. And I wish I had taken a picture with that poster, but I didn't at the time. I just remember seeing it and thinking, oh, that's so neat. All these kids there corralling these kids. But anyway, kind of fun thing to think about. Okay, so then I've turned in the bus and I've gone home, and then that very next morning, it was like 8:30 a.m. I was at the school in my office when I got the phone call that he had been injured. And then I got another phone call saying that they were taking him to the trauma hospital. They wouldn't tell me what happened, but they had determined they would take him to a different hospital. I just packed up my stuff. Somebody in the office took me over to my mom, who was at a different school, and we drove to the hospital to see. I knew nothing about how he was. All I knew was he was alive. I just didn't know anything about it. While we were there in the emergency room, and he was in the hospital only about 2 days, and what we got thrown into now, I realize I didn't know at the time what it was like. And when I talk to the general public about this, they generally don't know. But we tend to think that law enforcement officers in this country, if they get injured in line of duty, that they're taken care of. There's just no question about it. And that's not what happens. And I found that out the hard way. We got thrown into this workers' compensation system, what actually I feel they don't really care about the person that's injured at all. And it's more about saving money. And so he was not in the hospital more than a couple of days and sent home. And he wasn't allowed to have any rehab. They'd actually set up an appointment for afterwards, but workers' comp would never approve it. So he didn't actually get rehab. And it was only with fighting over that for I ended up with 2 attorneys eventually, but at about 13 months, I finally got him hospitalized again with the brain injury doctor out of Wake Med in Raleigh. They put him back in for 15 days and did a lot of testing. Although I have to say they did neuropsych testing about 6 months out and found that he wasn't doing well. So they knew that he wasn't doing well, but I could get no services for him. And even after he was in the hospital for the second time where they were trying to figure out what was wrong, he came out with this whole sheet of, from A to Z, this is what he's going to need. By this point, he was already 13 months out, and he had not been given any kind of rehab for that. And he had other injuries too. It took him 6 months to put his arm back together. And workers' comp is just a really hard process to be in if you have a brain injury, because time is of the essence with a brain injury, and your time ticks by. And even if you're fighting for it, it's very hard to get the services. So that was kind of what shocked me the most, I think, is that even when he came out of the hospital the second time, and they assured me at the hospital, the social worker assured me that all of his care would be set up with workers' comp because he couldn't be left alone at all. And I had been taking care of him along with our 3 kids, and we were just trying to do the best we could, didn't know anything about brain injury. But when I got home and nobody showed up, we didn't have any nurses there to help take care of him, nothing. I called the adjuster, and she said, well, we're not taking care of him for the rest of his life. I suggest you leave him home alone and you go back to work. And I was devastated. I have to say, it was devastating for him to be injured because we were high school sweethearts and very close. And I mean, we did so many things together, and he was very close to his children. And to hear her say they were not going to do what the doctor said, that was the most devastating day that I can pinpoint. And it was bad enough to have the injury, but then to have somebody in a system that is going to systematically neglect what you need and deny your care and say, you just leave him home alone. We don't care. We've seen this. We've saw what the doctors have said. We don't care. We're not going to take care of him. And you go back to work and you just leave him there. And that was devastating. I have to say, the most devastating moment. So it started kind of like that. That was at 13 months out. And then I just had to keep fighting for his care. Long story short, I'll speed it up a little bit, but about 4.5 years in, after going to the news media, finally put his basic care into place. And so it took that long. It took that long of fighting. And I'm a fighter. I was very nice beforehand. I mean, I'm nice now, but then, I mean, nothing ever upset me or anything. And so I can just tell you, it brought the warrior out in me. And I was not going to let them treat my husband the way they did, because we loved him so much. And there was no way that I was going to let them do what they were trying to do. I mean, I feel like if our law enforcement officers and other first responders are injured in the line of duty in this country, protecting us here right at home, that they deserve to be taken care of. And I don't care how much care that takes, or if helping them to rebuild a new life takes all of our help. I think they deserve it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Kay, you're in this caregiver role now. You've got a loss of income, horrific changes. Tell us how you got through that.
Well, I have to say that I believe in God. And while I was on the field trip, that night, it was as if God was pouring into me everything he'd ever done for us in our lives. It was like a replay in my mind. Now I feel as I was being prepared for this time. I feel like that this was not a surprise to God. And, but although I didn't know what was coming, he did. And that night I had a roommate. It's funny. She was the counselor at our middle school, and I had never spent that much time with her, but I talked her ears off. And I thought, wonder why all this is coming in. Maybe I'm just to share it with her. So I talked her ears off about how fantastic God is and all the things that God had done for us in our lives. And so the next morning when I got that phone call, it was as if God wrapped his arms around me, and I was at perfect peace when I got that call. Now I was a little excited, but I was like, it was as if I could feel this, his arms just wrapped around me. And later on, I talked to my coworkers, and they said, we've never seen anybody as peaceful as you were at that moment. And I can guarantee you it wasn't me. It was God. And so, for the first year, I maintained that peace pretty much for the first year. Even though I was fighting, I didn't even cry. I mean, it was like I knew that God was able, and I just knew that everything was going to be okay. It was a huge battle, but I can tell you this, after it hit me, they weren't going to take care of him. I cried for the next 4 years, probably nonstop, day and night. I mean, my kids would find me in the closet crying. I would go in the closet and get in the middle of my clothes. I didn't want everybody to see I'm the kind of person, I don't necessarily want everybody to see how upset I might be. But it was just devastating. So, but however, I still had my faith in God. And I just have to share that the night that when I did get that phone call from work, I talked to workers' comp and said, we're not taking care of him. I was probably as close to having a breakdown I think I've ever been. I cried my eyes out. I went and got in the bed and wrapped up in a blanket. And I was shaking all over because I just knew that we were going to get help, and then there was no help coming. And I remember that night, every time I would open my eyes, I actually heard scripture being spoken over me in the spirit. And I don't know if anybody's ever experienced that or be listening to this, but I knew that God was with me. So I have to say it wasn't me. I don't have the strength to do something like this. This is the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life, is to watch someone that you love go through something and then you can't get care for them. And it's not because they don't know. They know how injured these officers are. I've seen this happen across the country with multiple officers across the country. They're going through the same thing. They know it. It's just the way the system is set up to save money. And if they can deny that you have a brain injury or that you need care, or deny your care for a year or more, or whatever it is, I've been told that every day they deny care is $1 saved. They may know eventually they're going to have to do it if you keep fighting. But every day they don't do it, they save some money. So it's really, it's just a hard place to be in.
Awful, terrible. Gosh. So, okay, suddenly you needed to change jobs quickly. There was a loss of income. You were used to 2 incomes in your home. You're down to 1. You needed to change quickly. You decided to pursue further education and become a caregiver to a brain injury survivor. How in the world did you begin to map out your path to this illustrious career that you now enjoy?
Well, if you had told me this is where I was going to be today, way back then, I would have never have believed it. But the thing is, my husband and I were high school sweethearts. So I put him through college first. Only one of us could go. I worked and put him through college first. And I said, I'll just go when the kids grow up. We had 3 beautiful kids. And so when our son started off to college that year, which was 2009, the same year my husband was injured, I started taking online classes, but I was taking a BA in Christian studies. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the ministry. In fact, my husband and I were actually licensed together, and then I was ordained after he was injured. But nevertheless, I had started my degree, but as soon as he was injured, I couldn't do any of that. He was so bad off, I couldn't do anything. It took me about 2.5 years after he was injured to say, okay, it's now or never. I felt like if I just had to go back. I just knew that I needed to get back into school. So I did finish my BA. I went to the community college. I was able to get a grant. And then I also enrolled at Grand Canyon University. So I was dually enrolled, and I took like 6 or 7 classes at community college and about 2 or 3 at the other college. And I threw everything in. In 13 months, I had my 4-year degree. I booked it, and I was still taking care of him. But the one thing that I knew that I needed the most was that it was such a hard time in my life that I needed something to think about outside of myself. And so my education was actually my mental health care. When you get so isolated as a caregiver, especially if someone brain injury, and they have all kinds of behaviors that you're dealing with that you've never seen before. And this person that you've known your whole life, all of a sudden comes home as somebody else completely. They resemble your husband. They may look like your loved one, but they can be completely different. And so having this I just had to have it for my own mental health. So I finished my BA, and then I took about a year or so off. And then my oldest daughter and I, we did our master's online together. And then, so we got our master's degree together at GCU. And then I enrolled in my doctorate program when I discovered there was no help in this country. I had been discovering this over years. There was just no help in the country for injured officers. Then I discovered there was nothing in the research about officers with brain injury or their caregivers. So I started my doctorate. In the middle of my doctorate, I had started my doctorate, probably been in about a year. I decided to do a second master's degree. So I did my second master's degree and my doctorate at the same time. I was dually enrolled at 2 different universities, still taking care of my husband 24/7 and doing these degrees, but it kept me going. The reason why I could do it is because I felt like I was called to do this. I felt like God was calling me to help people, that I knew that other injured officers were going to come behind us and their families. And if I could do anything at all to pave the way for them, to make it a little bit better, that's what I wanted to do. So, and it was a battle to be able to do all of this. And my kids know how hard it was. My husband wasn't doing well at the time. And even when I went to have to residency, which I had to do for my doctorate degree, he laid on the floor at home and cried and thought I had left him. And so here I am at first residency. And I just want to say this out to them, anybody who might be listening to it. Sometimes you got to do things, and it doesn't matter what you look like doing it. You just have to do it. Here I am at my first residency. I had left my husband at home. This was, I forgot what year it was at this point, but I hadn't left him at all. And I knew he was at home crying. Here I am at residency crying. I'm sitting in a class of people at residency, and here I am sitting there crying. I mean, it was like, but I had to be there. And so I just sat there and I worked hard. I really, really worked hard. And it's so funny because at second residency, I didn't cry about anything at second residency, but he did the same thing at home. But the person that sat beside me said, Kay, after we graduate, I want to work for you. Because let me just say, when I was at residency, I was working 24/7. A lot of people were taking time to, I didn't take breaks. I carried my food around and sat down at the table and worked the entire time. So it was like I worked so hard because I had a reason, not that everybody else didn't, but I just really felt that I was being, it was taking time. And Melaney, it took me 13 years. It took me 13 years to get to where I had my degree, and then I was actually hired at Siebert, even part-time. It took me 13 years. So it was a very long haul, and I just prayed every day, God, help me to do this. In the middle of all that, 5 years ago this October, I was rear-ended myself and had significant injuries. I'm still dealing with those.
Oh, no.
Car accident was, yeah. I carried my computer around everywhere. And even when I had to go back for an emergency room visit, I actually thought I was going to die before the doctors found it. It was so bad. I had fluid building up all over my body, and I couldn't sleep or lay down at night. But this is the research and my love for my family and my husband is really what kept me going. And so I carried this computer around everywhere I went, even the emergency room, because it was so important to me. It is a labor of love. It's been a huge blessing, and I'm just thrilled to be at the point that I am to actually finally feel like I have a voice and that I have a platform to be able to speak and let people know what's going on with other people, because not everybody has the opportunity or can speak for themselves if they have the brain injury.
Well said. Speak for themselves. That's why we do these podcasts, to enlighten others and give information. Thank you, Kay. So you wear many hats. You alluded to this briefly before. You're a motivational speaker, an author, a minister, and an adjunct professor. Can you speak to those hats that you wear and the colleges that you're employed at this time, please?
Sure. I am absolutely thrilled to say that I'm a dissertation chair at Carolina University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And also I work remotely for William Woods University out of Fulton, Missouri. I'm an adjunct professor there teaching leadership courses, and I love it. And you know what I love the most, and when I applied for these positions, because I have to have something remote so that I can take care of my husband, because obviously he's still my number one priority. What I found out is that I have the opportunity. A lot of my students are adult learners, and they're going through things in their own lives. And so I have this opportunity that when I find out that the student is struggling and they say, I've had so-and-so happen in my family, I'll say, it's okay. I'll work with you. I got here through adversity. It wasn't easy, but I know you can do it. And all of my students have made it out of my class. So I'm just thrilled that it's been a fantastic opportunity. I love it. I know that education is the key to so many things. It's able to have a good job, being able to support your family, but it's also the key to changing, I believe, the world in whatever you decide you're going to do.
Well said. So Humberto went on a journey that no one wants to go on. So here we are, but he has found beauty from ashes. Tell us the amazing things that Humberto is doing now in terms of adaptive sports.
Sure, absolutely. So pretty much he was standing up against the wall. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I remember asking his doctor when we were in the hospital the second time, what in the world are we going to do? What are we going to do for the rest of our lives? I mean, he was 42 years old. I was 40 years old. I'm like, we're young people. I have no clue what I'm going to do with him. And he said, well, he's going to do what he did before. And I'm like, he said, what did he like to do before? And I said, okay, well, he was a golfer, and he swam in college, and he ran cross country in college. He said, well, he's going to do those things now. Now, if you had told me he was going to do those things, I wouldn't have believed it. And I would have never even thought about adaptive sports. But I took what they said because that's what we had. And my husband was an avid golfer. In fact, I used to kid with him that I was going to bury him on a golf course one day. He spent so much time at the golf course. And now I'm like, thank God he had golf, right? There's something to rebuild on. but it had damaged his right arm so much. He was a right-handed golfer that he had to learn how to play left-handed. So I would say for the first, I don't know, year or so, I remember going the first time out into the golf course, and he would hit it and it would go way, I mean, all over the place. And I would say, okay, let's go get it. And then he'd hit it again. It would be way off fairway somewhere else. I'm like, that's okay. Let's go get it. We chased a lot of balls for a year. I used to take him to the golf course about twice a day. We couldn't even afford a golf cart. I didn't have any money. Couldn't even buy a cup of coffee at the time. I had to refinance our house just to throw bills in to be able to keep everything. But I took this little chair around and I would sit down. I was so exhausted. Our kids even helped driving him to physical therapy. Our oldest daughter had her driver's license and she would help driving him to physical therapy. We were trying so hard to get him back. And I would carry that little chair around and sit at the, he would hit and I would sit. I was so tired, but we did it. And now he has a world ranking. So he was one of the first golfers in the United States when they came out and they classified people for the WR4GD status world ranking. Now he's not high up there ranking, but hey, he still has a golf ranking in adaptive golf and he loves to golf. So he does a lot of adaptive golf. He's also done triathlons. I put out there on Facebook early on, just trying to find anybody. Okay, is there anybody out there? I have an injured officer that would love to do a triathlon. He can't do it by himself. Would anybody be a safety? And I had a guy who's in the special forces. Now he's actually a commander in the special forces who volunteered to be a safety. And we've traveled a bit with him and just here around and done triathlons. And recently he did a half Ironman with the Challenge Athletes Foundation out in San Diego with 2 safeties that he had out there. So the point is, it's been fantastic to watch him do this. It's not easy to get there necessarily, but when you get there and he does these events and he wins these medals, it makes a huge difference. But the thing is that I truly believe that anybody can do anything. They might need help from somebody else to do it, but with help, you can do anything. And I've even seen a child with no arms and no legs swimming in an adaptive event. And so what we can do after brain injury, and for somebody else who's listening, they may not be athletic. That just was his thing. They may like something else, but we can rebuild on what we have left and start our life from there and rebuild a good life. Now, I found 0 in the country. This is year 15 years ago for injured officers. And so it was a veterans group that actually adopted us in to begin with. And then we found Challenge Athletes Foundation, which has a Operation Rebound part for injured first responders as well as veterans. There are a little bit more than they used to have. And I also started a nonprofit myself because of that very reason. There wasn't anything for him called Operation Homeland Honor. And I just started maybe 6 months to 8 months ago. I host a national support group for injured law enforcement officers on a monthly basis just to have a support group for them.
Mm-hmm. Please, listeners, check out Operation Homeland Honor. Amazing website, and we are so proud of Humberto. So, Kay, let's talk about your children. They went through this horrible journey with you. I remember Kaylee, your daughter Kaylee, telling me one time, my dad is not the same. That's not my dad. Obviously, it was tough for your kids to cope with what happened. How are they doing now?
Well, the kids are doing really good. Kaylee was 12 at the time. Our oldest daughter Rebecca was 15. She was 5 days away from getting her license. And I have to tell you, I said, okay, Rebecca, you're in charge of Kaylee. Braxton, you're on your own. He was in college. It's just chaos in the beginning. And Rebecca really stepped up and they drove all over the country in a little Volkswagen, all over town. Like she got let loose at 16 because she was in charge. They're doing great. They're all very well educated and doing very well in their careers. And I'm so proud of them because it wasn't easy. I remember Kaylee was like, I call his lap child because my husband was like, he loves his kids. He still loves his kids and his grandbabies, like his number one fan. My husband was home. Kaylee, our youngest, was in his lap. And when he came home from the hospital, you couldn't touch him. He wouldn't even stay in the same room with you. He couldn't stand to hear your voice. I mean, he actually told me, I cannot stand to listen to your voice. He couldn't stand to listen to anybody's voice. It was just too loud. That super sensitive hearing, super sensitive smell, all the things that can happen after brain injury. And he does have cognitive issues and dementia and things like that. But the kids are doing fantastically well. I'm so proud of them. But it wasn't easy. I remember getting a phone call from one of the girls' teachers who told me she was sleeping in class. I'm like, that is fantastic because we're not getting any sleep at home. And, even though they knew me at the school, because I worked at the school and then the high school was right next door, I don't think they understood that when you have a brain injury or some catastrophic event happen in the family, it affects the entire family, not just the person that has the injury. And, they were calling kind of saying, oh, she's a little bit in trouble. I'm like, look, we're going through a crisis here and we're not getting any sleep at home. And I never heard from them again. Anyway, evidently that went okay after that. Our kids are doing great. I'm not saying it's easy for them today, because it's not. I will have to say that I talk with my kids on a daily basis, especially my girls, about how hard it is and the issues that are coming up. And then they are my huge support for me now. So they're fantastic. It's great to have them as adults now, and they're fantastic humans.
Well, and we sure love you, Rebecca. Rebecca is our producer here at Seabird, and she's an amazing human and colleague. You've done great with your kids. Hey, you mentioned previously to me when we were just chit-chatting that you felt your children could use what they went through to help others. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely, because I constantly see when I'm out in the community, I do some speaking at Mossflower Abbey, and they have a farm that they invite brain injury caregivers out to, and we do programming out there. But first of all, brain injury, when someone has a brain injury, we know that suicidal ideation can be increased among this group. And we also know through the research that it crosses over into family units. And actually, the research that I just completed, 3 of those participants lost children to suicide after their first responders were injured.
Oh my.
And there was also a high suicidal ideation rate among the first responders reported by the caregivers that were in my study. So we know that our kids are suffering. And I know that there are current kids suffering simply because I'm in the loop with a lot of injured officers across the country. And so I think my kids are uniquely qualified. Kaylee just graduated with her doctorate degree, and Rebecca's very well educated and also as well. And I think they're uniquely qualified, having lived through the experience, to also now be able to look back and say, well, this is what we could have used or needed, and this is what we went through. And I remember Kaylee on the podcast would say things, and this is normal to think these things. Kids that have these issues, they're in this situation, and other people that in the same situation are also struggling. So they're not alone. And my dream is that we actually develop some programs and interventions for our kids and families. And in fact, you probably saw, Melaney, this week that the Brain Injury Association of America was announcing that traumatic brain injury has now been officially announced as a chronic condition. Yes?
Yes.
And that was a long time. Absolutely wonderful news. And that was a long time coming. And it's so funny, and it's not funny, but over the weekend I was working on my manuscript, and I found a study from 1991 out of Israel. And the very first sentence is, now mind you, this is in 1991, traumatic brain injury is both an acute and chronic impairment with long-term difficulties affecting both the patient and members of the patient's families. And this came out of a research study in Israel back in 1991. So way back then, I think my mouth fell open. We've known for some 30 years how difficult this is on families. I think that we need to do something about it.
Well said. Well said. Okay, just real quick, if you could tell me, what would you say to a wife and a mother who's received a similar call in the past week or two that you received in 2009? What nugget of hope can you give that person? Because we will have those listeners on today.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, we will, right? We know that brain injury happens. We're at risk of brain injury, especially if you're a first responder or in a high risk profession. And I would just say that it's going to be a fight, no doubt. It may not be. I want to say this too. There were some people in my study who had positive outcomes. It's not everybody that has a negative outcome, but it was a very low percentage. So I don't want to put that out there. You're going to have a hard time. But if you do have a hard time, I just want to say that they're not alone, that they can reach out to me at Siebert, and I can share resources with them that way. There are a lot of support groups now that are out there for people that are going through this. It is something that you have to take care of yourself. Okay, if this is a caregiver, or you're getting ready to be a caregiver, or you're just currently now a caregiver, it's really important to take care of yourself too, because you have to you can't take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself. We tend to, at caregivers, really take care of everybody else. And I say that, and I still don't spend the care that I should on myself, but I'm better about it than I used to be. It is a chronic issue. Many people do find that they can recover and rebuild new lives. And so keep in mind that no matter what you see now, that there is hope to rebuild on something else. I think, to me, what I've learned the most is to allow myself to feel what I feel at the time I feel it,
Right.
because, and then process that emotion and not try to bottle that up. Find somebody you can talk to and share it with. And there are, at least there are now more supports than there were, especially if you're a law enforcement officer. There are more supports than there used to be, even though we need a whole lot more. But there are some basic supports out there now. So just don't give up and keep at it. Somebody told me it was a marathon, not a sprint. I didn't know what it meant. The more that you're in it, you're going to understand that. But in other words, take care of yourself, but be prepared to do what you got to do. You do what you have to do to take care of your family.
Well said. Are we in a better place with our first responders now who have sustained head injuries? Knowledge is power. Are we in a better place in 2024?
Well, the thing is, I've talked to several this week. If I had to say so, I would say not much. I would say we haven't got very far yet. There were a couple of it was a small percentage that had positive outcomes. When I say positive outcomes, they had positive outcomes with workers' compensation. They had positive outcomes and support from their departments. That is correlated with the positive outcomes they reported. Like, if these people in the study said they got the care that they needed and they got the departmental support they needed, they were not the ones that were reporting suicidal ideation. They were reporting positive outcomes. If they didn't get the care they were needed, they were still fighting with workers' compensation to get care, or they yet received any care at all, even years later. We have first responders that have brain injury, and years later, they still have received zero care.
Oh, wow.
I feel like we're just now even laying the foundation, which is what my goal is with my research, is to lay the foundation so that we can build supports and interventions for them. Are we better off in the sense that there are some nonprofits now that are working with injured officers? Yes. Because when I first started in 2009, I couldn't find any nonprofits that helped injured officers. They only helped officers who had given the ultimate sacrifice, and they had to have died in the line of duty to get any services for the family. And I understand that they need those services, absolutely 100%, and they need more than what they're getting. But we have to remember that there are catastrophically injured officers and their families in the country that now have to live this way. And many of them, brain injury is hitting them in the prime of their life. And so they're not eligible for services like if they were older or whatever. I mean, it's in the prime of their life, and most of their friends are going to be still working. Their children are likely to be young. This is not typically going to have grown children if they're still working as a first responder. So it's not where I found it, but we're not where we need to be.
Okay. The governor of North Carolina recently appointed you to the North Carolina Brain Injury Advisory Council. These accolades keep coming in for you. You are so incredibly busy, but what are your future goals? Share with us.
Well, this has been fantastic. I was so excited I framed that, because the thing about it is, when something happens, I just felt like I had no voice. And it took me all that time to be able to actually get my degrees and my credentials and become a researcher to actually feel like I had a voice again. I was so happy to get that. So that group advises the state on services that are needed within the state for people with brain injury. Really new to the group. I just started in December, and they do meet quarterly, and they're in the process of revamping to make sure that they're actually doing exactly what the advisory council is supposed to do, which is very exciting. And I think the point here is to actually, again, have a voice for people. I'm a part of the council as a member of a person that has brain injury. So I can represent people that, family members of persons with brain injury, to let people know exactly what's going on. If you don't live this, you don't know. If you don't live this on a daily basis, you don't know. And so being able to just say, well, this is what's going on, or giving my advice as a caregiver of a family member, or even now I can offer what I know through research, even though, of course, this is a new research field. There's not a lot of research in this area in this country. I'll be on there at least for 4 years, and hopefully I'll have another appointment for 4 years, and we'll just see what we can do. I have shared with them, of course, what it's like for our injured officers in the state and other first responders. So I'm hoping that we can actually get some more supports in the state of North Carolina.
And I know you will continue your research and your amazing work at the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training. So Dr. Reyna will be presenting at the National Association of Head Injury Administrators in September 2024 in Eugene, Oregon, and she will present on the topic of protecting those who serve, lived experiences of law enforcement officers with TBI, caregivers, and children. So, Kay, thank you so much for sharing your insights, experiences, and your invaluable contributions to understanding and supporting those affected by traumatic brain injury. We here at the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training are intensely proud of you and wish you and your family all the very best. Thanks, friend.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.